Welcome to the Creative Advantage, creative ideas for Barry Mitchell products. Today we're doing a crash course on sponge. I want to show you some of the ideas and some information that you need to know to understand how to use the wonderful world of Goshman sponge. Okay, let's get started with Supersoft. Supersoft comes in a variety of colors. I have here red, yellow, green, blue, and black. And also an orange, of course. These are all 2-inch, and this is the size that we carry, and these are super soft. What that means is that they will expand and they have a great deal of strength, so they're much less likely to tear. And the nice thing about it is, because it will expand, if you wet it, it gets much larger. Okay, so you can see the difference. That's a 2-inch ball dry and a 2-inch ball wet, and if these stay compressed, they're going to somewhat lose their shape. Something like this. You'll notice how the star is dry and it's like this, but when it is wet, it will pop back into place like this, not to mention the fact that it gets much larger. So that's the big advantage of super soft sponge, is that it expands and yet it's also extremely strong. But there are some weaknesses with super soft, and that is that those colors will bleed. So for example, if you put blue and yellow together, whether they're either dry or wet, that blue is going to bleed over onto the yellow. There's nothing you can do to stop that. The reason is because the sponge begins white and then it is dyed to give it the color. So that dye never completely fills the sponge and it will just simply transfer over. Now here at Barry Mitchell Products, we also carry white sponge balls, which is most dealers don't have that. It is also a super soft product, and it is simply a sponge ball that has not been dyed. But all sponge yellows with time, and since this does not have dye in it, it is going to yellow, and you're going to notice that. I don't know how well you can see it on the camera, but you can see it starting to yellow, and it's not that one is any newer than the other. It's just a matter of time and yellowing and the fact that there is a slight amount of oil from when the sponge is cut. So if you're ordering a white sponge ball, you just need to know in advance that they're not going to stay brilliantly bright, but you also need to know that when you wet that, it's going to get larger and look brighter. So that's important to know when it comes to white sponge balls. Now we're back to the 2-inch super soft, and we sell those only in the 2-inch, but if you go with the no bleed, we sell those in 1.5-inch. Now here's the difference between a regular super soft, where the dye will bleed on each other, and a no bleed ball. These balls, if they stay together or if they are wet, the color does not bleed over, and that's because they did not begin white. They actually were made in that color in the foam before the foam was cut. So the no bleed colors come in black, orange, yellow, and red, and those colors will not bleed on each other. A regular sponge ball, for example something like a sponge nose, is going to be thicker. It's going to have more density to it. It's not going to compress as easily. It's also probably not going to bleed over, but it really has no purpose when it comes to a production. For a production trick, you want a super soft ball, and you're going to use the no bleed if you're combining that with a color that you do not want it to bleed upon. For example, yellow or one of the lighter colors. Okay, so that's the purpose for that. Let's get those out of the way as well and tell you about something new that we offer, and that is no bleed red hearts. So that means that you can put those with regular sponge. You can have them wet and it doesn't bleed over, which opens up a lot of opportunities. Now, when it comes to the no bleed sponge, it's not really necessary that this be wet, because unlike super soft, it's not going to expand. So it's not necessary to wet this, but it is good to wet the regular super soft to get it larger and give a bigger production. I'll show you what I mean. First of all, let's go with a smile maker and tell you a little bit more about that. This is my personal one. It's been used quite a bit. Here is the look of a new one. You can see how bright and smooth that is. And then this is my personal one. You see it's starting to get a little dirty, and you can also see that it starts to have some little tears in it. I'm telling you this because sometimes customers will say, is mine supposed to look like that? With use, yes, it's supposed to look like that. That's just a natural part of use. Now, if you have our smile maker, I'll show you how that works. The balls are wet, and so in the bag, I'm going to simply turn that inside out with my thumb, and that will pop there's the large smile, and then of course it's got the 8 smaller smiles. That's our smile maker trick, and that we're using the pop-up can that is part of our pop-up production trick, and you can see all of these videos on our website. To put that into the Incrediball, we're simply taking those balls, placing it on the face, and turning it inside out. Now it's important for everything to be wet. So there you are. That's the basic gist of what happens with Smile Maker. Okay, let me get those out of the way and show you a reason for having the no bleed balls. And in this case, we have a yellow Incrediball. And with that, I've added several of the no bleed products. So I'm going to pop that here and show you that in that yellow Incrediball, which has not been painted, we sell these as our yellow Incredi set or our yellow Incredi, what do you call it, our no bleed pop-up version as well. So in that I put one of our 5-inch yellow hearts and several of the no bleed sponge balls. Since these don't bleed, I don't have to worry about that bleeding over onto the yellow. This is actually a 1.5-inch regular Supersoft, but once again, the yellow is not going to bleed. That's not going to be the issue. The issue will be the darker colors bleeding over. Since these are no bleed, it's no problem. I can put all of those together. We added some hearts in there, and all of that creates a very colorful production. Give you another example about the importance of wetting it. Notice the size difference between the cube, dry, and wet. Same product, just dry and wet, and when you work dry, it's very difficult to turn it inside out, and as you're turning it, you're going to get the impression you're going to tear the sponge. You're going to have that feel to you, and you're going to have that fear. But when it's wet, it easily turns inside out, just like so. And it makes it really easy to put another sponge ball inside. Now, notice what I just did. I took a no bleed ball and put it on a red Incredi cube, and the question is, will that no bleed ball bleed over? No, it can't. But since this is regular Supersoft, it can bleed over onto this. So although these do not bleed onto lighter colors, that doesn't mean that a regular sponge ball will not bleed on them. So keep that in mind. It doesn't work the opposite way. This color will bleed on these. That's why we had to use a yellow here that can't bleed over. There's a lot of information here. I'm putting it out to you as fast as I can, just so you have a better understanding of the products we offer and how they work. Let me show you also the little letters that we sell, the alphabets letters. This is a different consistency of foam. Now this has the dye already in it, so it is not going to bleed over. That's not going to be a problem. However, because it's not Supersoft, it doesn't need to be wet. So that is not really an issue, unless you're simply adding that in with something like this, and that gives you another creative idea to have the letters appear. So that works fine. That's another option for you. Now let me also show you the idea of what you do with these when between shows. I usually leave them wet between shows, put them in a Ziploc bag with a dryer sheet, just a simple dryer sheet that gives them a nice fresh smell, and I wash them out every so often. Okay, let me show you the look of our bucket filler trick. There's the bucket with the 18 stars in it. You can see how it looks when the stars are dry, and here's a couple of our other 5-inch stars stars that are dry, but I showed you here one of the wet stars really pops, looks much bigger. Now this is our bucket filler with the gimmick in place. Of course the bucket is empty, but in this case the stars are there, they are wet, and you can see the difference with just a little pull of the gimmick, and those 18 stars really pop and fill the bucket entirely. So it really makes a huge difference when you're working with our bucket filler for the stars to be wet. Okay, lots of difference there. So that gives you another idea of another one of our products. Let me also tell you about our hearts, and that is our heart attack trick. Okay, the heart attack is very unusual because it does offer something that no one else has, and that is a heart with a hole in it. So it comes with a heart with a hole and a larger heart as well that doesn't have the hole, and some smaller hearts, a big kit. And that is a limited edition. You can see that on our website as well. But I show you this so that you'll understand the difference. This is a no bleed heart that comes with the heart attack kit. And excuse me, this is a regular Supersoft, so it will bleed. And this is the no bleed heart that we sell. You can see the difference there. It's the same size but cut thicker and of a different sponge. So this is going to get larger when it's wet. This will not, but this will not bleed on this. Okay, so we've given you quite a bit of information there. There's one more thing I want to tell you about it in the world of sponge, and that is the sponge rocks. These are white sponge that has been covered with a latex and then painted, so that is not going to be soft like all the other sponge. That is going to have a harder texture to it. It's not really designed to compress and hide, or at least not in a small space. So I'll give you some ideas of some of the different products that are available in our Supersoft and No Bleed sponge line. Thank you for coming to BarryMitchellProducts.com.